Wondering how you can take your user experience to the next level when working with forms or data inputs? Stick around till the end because we're going to learn how you can get your users to create stuff in your application just by talking to it with their voice. Yes, you heard right. We're going to create users in an external database using voice inputs and AI. Hey devs, welcome back to the channel. Today, I'm going to show you how to make API requests using an AI model. No forms, just natural language. Normally, you'll fill out a form on the front end to send data to the backend API, but what if instead you just said create a user with email example@gmail.com, age 30, phone 123456 and password ABCDF, and the AI turns that into a real API request. That's exactly what we're going to build. Here's the plan in 3 simple steps. We're going to talk to the AI using the Gemini SDK, testing some plain text examples, then record voice and let the AI transcribe it to text, making the experience hands-free. And third, we're going to get the AI parse that text into JSON and send it as a post request to your API. By the end, you'll have a complete voice to API flow powered entirely by AI. Let's dive in. So the first thing we're going to do is to follow this link that I'll leave in the description and click here on Get a Gemini API Key. The following things that we're going to do are totally free, so don't worry. But anyways, I advise you to go and check the pricing for the different models that you can use. That said, let's click here on Get a Gemini API Key. It will redirect us to this dashboard where we just simply need to click here on Create API Key. Here you can select an existing project or create a new one and generate the API key. I want to do it because in my case I already have my API key here and I will use that one. Note that we'll be working on a React simple application, an application created with Byte, nothing behind the scenes. And the reason I'm telling you this is because we are going to go back to the documentation, and here on the quick start section we have the command that we need to run to install the Gemini SDK. These with the API key are the only things we need before starting to work with the AI. So let's copy this into our terminal and paste it and install. Once we installed this SDK, we're ready to start interacting with the Gemini SDK. These were all the prerequisites that we needed before starting to work with it. Okay, so we said that the first thing that we were going to do is to just interact with the AI, sending a plain text prompt and receiving back just a plain text response. For that, we're going to go back to the documentation here on the overview section. We have the small code snippet and we will use this little section over here, which is a method call from the Google Gen AI. We'll bring this to our code in a function called send request. We paste it here, and we also need to import the Gemini SDK. We have that over here. We need these 2 lines. Let's paste it over here. With this, we're importing the Google Gen AI SDK and setting up here the API key. So here you should place your API key. I have mine stored in the .m file. You just place your API key here. And with that, we have imported the proper method from the Gen AI. This will be an async function because we will wait for the response from the AI, and we're sending here just a plain text that says explain how AI works in a few words. In the response here we'll have the result that answers to the prompt that we are sending to Gemini. So let's console log the response. With this method we should be able to interact with the AI. The only thing that we're missing now is just a button to interact with that. So let's create this button here that sends the request, and we should see the console log in our Chrome DevTools. Let's check it out in our application. So here we have our hello world next to our send request button. Now if we click on here, we should receive the response from the AI. It takes its time because it's the AI generating the response, but finally we get the response here. And inside these nested objects we have our response. We asked how the AI works and it responded us with this sentence here. With this, we have our first interaction with the AI. The next thing we're going to do is to use this SDK to transcribe an audio file. For that, we will use the hook that I have over here in this full example called use recording. This hook is all about just recording the audio. It has nothing to do with AI or sending the audio to AI. But anyways, let's take a quick look over here. We have a couple of variables and states and use refs over here. We have 2 main functions to start recording and to stop recording. in the start recording function, we are making sure first that we can access to the user microphone. If we can, then we move forward and we create a media recorder. Then we attach to that media recorder two handlers for events. One that will be in charge of collecting the audio data, and the other one will be in charge of converting the audio data into an audio blob, and then that blob into a file. This is important because we need to send a file to Gemini. We can't send a blob because it won't work. We need to send a file. So for that, we have this helper here that converts our blob into a file. Other than that, we are just starting the recording and then just stopping the recording. And finally, we just return the recording boolean to indicate whether if we are recording or not. The stop recording function, start recording the audio URL just in case you want to download the audio, and the recorded file in a file format so we can send this to Gemini. With that explanation, let's copy the usage of this hook into our current example. With this hook, we can start and stop recording and we have the file. The only thing that we're missing here to be able to record a file is just a button to trigger the start and stop recording functions. So I will put this over here quickly, just a title, a simple dot here to indicate that we're recording, and a button to trigger the stop or start recording functions. Once we stop recording, we have our file stored in this variable over here. Now we need to decide what we want to do with this recorded file. And what we want to do is to transcript the audio inside. Let's create a function then for that called transcript audio, where we'll have the following content. First, we make sure that we have a recorded file. In this step, we're uploading our recorded file to the AI using the files upload method. And here we specify the file as the recorded file, and the config will be the type of the audio we recorded. Then we're making sure that the response we receive here has the required properties so that we can send it back again to the AI to get it transcribed. And we do that here in this example where we are using the same generic content method that we used before. But here in this case, instead of sending just a plain content, we're sending a content using some helpers from the Gemini SDK where we create the user content and create part from URI. And here we use the properties that we need here to be present on our file. And don't worry about that, they will be present if everything went well here on the uploading of the AI. And by last here, we're specifying to the AI that we just need to transcribe the audio. So this here is important because if we don't send this, the AI will just interpret our audio and send a response thinking about what we said on the audio instead of just transcribing the audio. So it's important to indicate here what we want the AI to do with the audio we recorded. Then we wait for the response, and if we don't have the text, we just throw an error to know that there is something that went wrong. And otherwise, on the last step here, we'll send a request to the database based on that text. But I want you to first see what the AI is doing with our audio file, and I want you to see the transcription first. So let's console log that. Now we just need to create a button that will trigger this function over here. So let's paste this here, a button that says just transcribe and send. We will just call it transcript by now, and we'll trigger the transcript audio function. With this, we should be able to go back to our app and transcribe an audio. If I click here on start recording and say something like, hello, this is a transcription for everyone watching this video, and click on stop recording and then on transcript, we should get here the response from the AI with the transcription. So transcription response, hello, this is a transcription for everyone watching this video. So just like that, we have the AI transcribing our audio inputs. And this is super powerful because you could use this wherever you want. You can implement this on a chat assistant, or you can implement this in a real world example, just talking to your application and getting it to create a new user in your database, for example, which is the case we're going to handle next. So just like that, we have the AI transcribing our audio inputs. Now that we have our AI transcribing our audio input, the next thing that we're going to do is, instead of having the AI to transcribe this audio input into a plain text, we're going to get it to transcribe it into a valid JSON structure that our backend endpoint is expecting. So we said that we were going to create a user in a database using this audio input. So for that, I have here another application running in my localhost, which is external to the current application that we are using, that shows us a list of available users in a certain database. What we want to achieve is that by talking to our current application, there should be a new user created in this table. So for this, we're going to make use of this function calling with the Gemini API. It basically allows the model to act as a bridge between natural language and real-world actions and data. In this case, it will act as a bridge between our speech and our backend. So we can see here that with the same method that we are currently using, we can specify a configuration that has tools inside. Tools that have function declarations, which is an array of objects that have the following structure. Here we have the name of the function we want to declare, description of what it should do, and certain parameters. These parameters will be converted into a JSON structure when our prompt gets processed by the AI. So we have here some properties: attendees, date, time, and topic, and here it's specifying that they are required. If we scroll down a bit, we have another example here that declares a function named setLightValues and with a description that says sets the brightness and color temperature of a light. So Gemini will interpret this content that we have in this function and take an action based on that. In this case, we have different parameters. We have brightness and color temperature for light specifications, and both are required. And as you can see here, we have an example of the response we get from the Gen AI. In this case, we have the arguments, which has brightness and color temperature. This is the format that we're going to get after the AI processes our audio input. So here, ideally, we want to have the username, the email, and the password, for example, for our case. This is just the first side of how function calling works, but you will understand this better as we go along with our code. So hands-on code. I'm going to create a function called sendRequest, which will receive our speech as a parameter. This function will also be async because we have to wait for the AI response. I'm gonna copy here the content of the function and we'll go step by step explaining what it does. First, same as we have here on the documentation, we have the function declaration. In this case, setLightValues function declaration, and in our case, create user function declaration. So this function has the same fields as we have here on the documentation, but adapted to our case. So it has the name create user, and this field is useful because then when we get the response from the AI, it tells us which function was triggered by the name. So in this case, the name is create user. Then we have the description about what this function does and the parameters. Think of these parameters as the parameters that you should get in the body of your backend route. So in this case, our backend will receive a name, an email, and a password to create the user. The three of them have the type string. Let's import this type from Google Gen AI. And with this, we have our function declared for creating a new user. Then we have another function declaration here, but in this case, it's for getting the users from the database. So its name is getUsers, and the description is retrieves all the users from the database. As you can see, it has no parameter on the declaration because we don't need to send parameters to the get route. Now, here is where the magic occurs. We're using the generate content method and we're sending the speech transcribed from our audio input and configuring the function declarations as tools. So with this, we're telling the AI what we want to do based on our audio input that was transcribed into speech and giving it the tools that it needs to convert this into a valid JSON structure that then we'll send to our backend for creating or getting users. And then, before reaching our backend with this last part of the function, I want you to first see the result that we get from the AI. So let's add a console log for that, and let me split my screen so you can see things side by side. So if we record now something like what happens if I record an audio now and send it, actually nothing will happen because we're forgetting to call our sendRequest function. So we just got the what happens if I record an audio now transcription response, which is the one that we have on the first function that we created here. Transcription response, it's the same that we have here because we are forgetting here to uncomment this line to call our sendRequest function to pass to it the response text that we're getting from the transcription. So now we should receive it over here and we can test now again what happens if we call this function with the same audio input. So what happens if I record an audio now and now transcript, and let's see what happens. Now we get the same transcription response, that we get an extra console log here that says function call response undefined. And the reason it says undefined is because the AI is recognizing that it doesn't need to call any of the functions we declared, because we're not saying anything that has to do with creating or getting the users. Now, if we say something like get me all the users from the database and transcript that, we should get a function call to the get users function. And there we have the transcription response, which is just the transcription, get me all the users from the database. And in this case, the AI is recognizing that it should use the get users function. And this is what I want you to see, because here, like we said before, we're getting the name of the function that was called, and in this case was the get users function. And then we have the arguments with what it was called, but in this case the parameters are empty, so there are no arguments. But now if we say something like create a user with the name Felix and the email felix@gmail.com and the password 123456 and send that, we should get the function call for this create user method. So there we have first the transcription and then the function call of create user declaration. And inside that we have the arguments that we talked about. We have the email, the name and the password, which matches the properties that we have set up here. So at this point, we're having an object that has the properties that we need to send to our backend. So now that we have this function call response, we can check the name of the function that was called, and if it was the create user function, we can access the arguments and call the backend post route to create a user with these arguments. And that's what happens in the following lines. Let's uncomment this code, and first we're making sure that function call is not undefined. So this means that the AI is recognizing that it needs to call one of our two functions that we declared. Then we just access to the arguments that we have in the function called args right here. And then, like I said, we are checking if the function called was the create user one. We just make sure that we have all the required parameters before we call the backend. And here we just have a simple post request to a backend, which is in localhost. You can see that it's post and the content type is JSON. And we have the body that we got from the arguments, and we're waiting for the response here and storing it in the rest variable. Otherwise, if the function call was get users, we just call this other endpoint, which will get us all the users in the database. Finally, we just convert the response to JSON format and console log that response. So now here we should see if there was a user created successfully, or if we got all the users from the database successfully. So let's try this out. This time we're going to check first the list of users that we have on our external application, and at the end we should get here a new entry with the new user created. So let's say something like create a user with the name Alexander and the email alexander@example.com and the password 123456. And if we send that to the database, to the AI, we should get the new user created in our database, in our external application. And there we have the function call response. This tells us that the create user function was called, and then we have the response, the last response, which comes from the request made to the backend. And then we have the specified fields for that user in the database. Now, if we go to our external application and we refresh the screen here, we should see the new user added to the table. So there we have a new user created in an external application. Just talking to our app, we can get all the users from the database, saying something like, get me all the users from the database, and we should get all the users listed on that table. And then we have the response. It was called the get users function without arguments because it's just a get request. And then we have all the users from the table, and we can see our recently created user and all the previous users that were there in the database. We can make another example so you can see the difference in the user's response. Let's say something like create a new user with the name Jackson, the email jackson@email.com and the password 123456. Let's send that, and we should get the new user created in the database. And then if we call again the get users function, we should get that new user created. So there we have the transcription first, the information that the create user function was called, with the arguments inside. And finally, we have the response from the request to our backend endpoint. And this confirms us that the user was created. If we go now to our external application and refresh the screen, we should get that JSON user created here. Now, if we go back and make a get request with our voice, get me all the users from the database, and send that request, we should get a 7 length here instead of 6, and JSON should be at the end of the list. So there we have. And like I told you, this is super useful because you can create whatever you want with this. You can create users, you can create expenses, you can create whatever model you have in your database, just talking to your application and changing here the parameters that you want to get from the prompt. And this can be a really game changer in your application user experience. And this can be an amazing feature for your users, having the ability to create stuff in your application just talking to it, instead of having to type manually the email, the password, or whatever they need for creating a user or the things that they need to create in your platform. So let me know in the comments what are your thoughts about this. I will leave in the description all the resources you need. And let me tell you that I know that this code I'm sharing with you is super draft. So I invite you to read it, improve it, and play around with it. Thanks for sticking around until the end. I hope you found this useful. I invite you to like, subscribe, and leave any comments you have below. That's all from my side. Thanks for watching and see you in the next one.